Hidden within Calgary Zoo is one of North America's most unusual primate experiences. Instead of viewing lemurs from the outside, the entire habitat is designed for movement. Guests pass beneath climbing networks, through indoor winter habitats, and below into the walkthrough itself, and recreating that balance between realism, atmosphere, and circulation turned out to be far more complicated than I expected. Today we're recreating Calgary Zoo's Land of Lemurs, the first stop in a new series, exploring immersive zoo design from around the world. What makes Calgary's Land of Lemurs so interesting isn't just the walkthrough itself, it's the fact that the entire exhibit was designed around a climate that looks like this for half the year. Rather than treating indoor spaces as a backup plan, the architecture was built directly into the guest experience. The walkthrough relies heavily on visibility and movement, with climbing routes crossing directly above the pathways to make the habitat feel shared rather than separated. Every path, island, and viewing angle is arranged to keep both the guests and the lemurs constantly moving through the space. Rather than opening with the habitat immediately, the pathways narrow, curve, and descend into the habitat. Lowering the walkthrough below the surrounding pathways helps create that feeling where guests are entering the habitat itself rather than a simple overlook. Land of Lemurs layout encourages exploration through the experience. Different sections are revealed gradually instead of all at once. One of the more awkward parts of recreating the exhibit in Planet Zoo is hiding the game's floating path beneath a custom wooden boardwalk. Guests may clip through the boards occasionally, but visually it's a huge improvement over the default path system. With the boardwalk cutting through the heart of the Land of Lemurs, it is starting to feel like a connected experience, even if the complex is a heavy work in progress. Trying for a no-barrier design often leads to a water barrier surrounding the island itself. The real habitat uses a shallow, naturalistic moat rather than heavy fencing, so the habitat feels open from almost every angle. Even before the landscaping is finished, the island immediately starts feeling separated from the guests once the water goes in. The rope network is really what defines the entire walkthrough experience. Rather than keeping lemurs limited to a few climbing frames, Calgary's habitat turns almost the entire habitat into one connected movement system. Some of the thicker ropes are fully climbable in-game, while others are purely decorative to make the structure feel far more complex than the game normally allows. With 5 structural frames spread around the walkthrough, I want guests to look upwards as the lemurs cross directly above the pathways. Since the lemurs frequently return to the water placement, the climbing routes need to constantly reconnect back to the centre of the habitat. Overlapping rope loops also help break up the open sky and make the habitat feel much denser once everything has been landscaped. Among the biggest challenges while recreating Land of Lemurs was the indoor habitat itself. Because in Calgary, the indoor spaces aren't hidden away behind the scenes, they're fully integrated into the walkthrough experience. Guests constantly move between outdoor viewing areas and these large glass indoor spaces depending on the season. So rather than designing a traditional zoo house, it needs to feel open, modern, and heavily connected to the habitat outside. The real building uses incredibly thin framing with huge interrupted glass panels, which is surprisingly challenging to recreate convincingly in Planet Zoo. To fake the slimmer modern framing, I layer multiple construction pieces together instead of relying on the default glass frames, something I long recognised as a critical improvement to my builds. The indoor habitat also needed to feel just as active as the outdoor walkthrough. Instead of treating the interior separately, the climbing routes continue directly through the building itself. That movement is what keeps the Land of Lemurs visually interesting during winter months, when guests spend far more time viewing the lemurs indoors. With the major structures finally finished, the walkthrough feels far too exposed without the surrounding landscape. One detail I really want to focus on here is the moat itself. A lot of Planet Zoo habitats stop at the waterline, but Calgary's walkthrough relies heavily on shallow naturalistic edges and underwater detail to sell the illusion. Even simple things like submerged rocks, uneven shorelines, and aquatic plankton make the water feel much more believable once guests start viewing it from above. I also want the foliage to feel much softer and more overgrown than most tropical walkthroughs. Calgary's habitat mixes lush summer growth with colder climate species that still feel believable outdoors for much of the year. Then once the landscape fills in around the climbing structures, the entire walkthrough begins to feel alive. What makes Land of Lemurs work so well is gradually how the experience reveals itself. Rather than exposing the entire habitat immediately, the pathways stay heavily enclosed as guests approach the entrance. The ropes, viewing areas, and climbing structures slowly begin appearing through the trees before guests enter the walkthrough itself. Once inside the walkthrough, the entire space is designed to constantly pull your attention upward. The overlapping climbing routes mean the lemurs are almost always moving somewhere above the pathways, because the habitat is built for movement rather than static viewing. The walkthrough then returns back into the elevated viewing spaces overlooking the black and white ruffed lemur habitat. The difference between immersive walkthrough and traditional viewing areas helps keep Land of Lemurs from feeling visually repetitive. Even the indoor habitat remains visually connected to the walkthrough through the large glass viewing spaces and continuous climbing routes. Calgary's design makes the entire exhibit feel interconnected year-round. What was planned to be a fairly simple walkthrough has turned into one of the most layered and movement-focused primate builds I've made in Planet Zoo. A return to Calgary Zoo has been in the plans for a while, and recreating that balance between architecture, circulation, and animal movement ended up being far more satisfying than I expected.